everybody. Thanks for joining us in our conversation as we followed up our special program, Reshaping a Greater New Orleans Criminal Justice, taking a look at the courts and the judiciary in the Orleans Parish criminal justice system. I'm Marcia Kavanaugh, Community Projects producer here at WYES, and I am joined here this evening by Janet Howard, who is the president and CEO of the Bureau of Governmental Research, and also Katy Reckdahl, who is a New Orleans journalist, and she worked with us on this program that you just watched and produced the reports that you saw. So what we want to do is just sort of continue on the conversation that we'd already started in our program. And one thing that I specifically wanted to do was talk to Janet about a recently released report by the Bureau of Governmental Research, and we're holding it right here. It's also on our website, on the page that you're on right now. We have links to this report and other reports too. But the BGR released Benchmarking the Bench, and it really took a close look at all the courts within Orleans Parish. For the purpose of this conversation, we're just going to stick with criminal courts. So if you could just sort of, in a nutshell, give us an idea of what your findings were, and then we'll delve into it a little bit more deeply.
Okay, to explain what this report's about, Marcy, we took each year the Judicial Council, which is the research arm of the Supreme Court, takes a look at the number of judges that are needed in courts, and it uses a metric to make a calculation. And what we did was take a look at the data that they've generated and reported on what they estimate for these various courts. And in Orleans Parish, their numbers are estimating approximately 20 judges are needed, whereas there are actually 45 in place, so a surplus of 125%. Now, these findings are kind of like, as I say, indicator lights. They're saying, maybe we should take a look at this court. And it's the first step in a process that they're supposed to go through to go to visit the courts, find out from the judges whether there are adjustments that need to be made because of characteristics of the courts, because they're using a formula that's based on a weighted caseload formula, and it applies for the average court, but there can be discrepancies for individual courts depending on their caseloads, whether their travel times, et cetera, in multiple jurisdictions, things like that. Mm-hmm. So what our report was saying is, this is what the Judicial Council's preliminary estimates show. We're urging them to go ahead, do the site studies for the courts that are showing the most surpluses. Do that before the next legislative session. Why? Because in the next 2014, 80% of the judges in Orleans are up for election. If the question of whether there are excess judges is not dealt with during the legislative session, we've lost the window of opportunity basically for another 6 years.
Because you can't remove a judge.
You can't remove a judge during his term of office.
So the Judicial Council reports, those started in 2006, the annual reports?
They started issuing the annual reports. I think the first one came out in 2006, and then in 2007 they continued it for another 5 years. And then in 2011 there was another resolution from the legislature asking the Judicial Council to continue its work by looking at whether the courts are efficiently structured, and that would imply also whether there's a proper number of judges in them.
And that's what's called HR 143.
Yeah.
And they are supposed to do, that commission is supposed to submit its final report, as you said, by February of 2014, before we move into the next legislative session.
Correct.
So as far as BGR and its report here is concerned,
Mm-hmm.
Are you guys saying we need to reduce judgeships definitely, or are you saying we need to really look a little bit more into this before making a decision?
We have not come out with any statement that X amount of judgeships needs to be reduced. What we have said is the Judicial Council's own numbers are indicating an excess. They need to follow through on whatever steps are necessary for them to arrive at a final conclusion on this. And if whatever number it shows to be excess, and I mean, even some of the judges are even saying that they have excess judgeships in some cases. Whatever that number is, the legislature should act to eliminate those. Why? Because the average cost of an excess of a judgeship in Orleans Parish, just for the judge and his personal staff, is $570,000 a year. Multiply that by 6 years, and you have $3.4 million. If it's for a judgeship that's not necessary, that's $3.4 million wasted over that period of time.
It's a goodly amount of money then.
It
something
is.
that we could indeed be saving. But I know the bottom line, though, and the concern is, of course, for public safety when we're talking about certainly within the criminal justice system. we hear complaints about things moving so slowly. We heard it, and certainly in one of the reports that Katy produced for our program, with the number of judges that we have. If we would reduce that, would this really just clog up the dockets all the more, do you fear?
Well, first of all, let's talk about what court we're talking about.
That was criminal court.
That was criminal court. Criminal court is the court that we found has where the biggest problems apply with respect to the workload formula that the Judicial Council uses. That maybe it'll help to walk through what that formula is.
Exactly.
Okay. So it says it's a weighted caseload formula. Basically, for each type of filing, there is a weight assigned to it. And that weight is an average for the amount of time that judges have estimated it takes them to deal with cases in that category. Now, one of the weaknesses in the formula has to do with the number of categories they have in the criminal justice arena. There are only 4 of them. There's only one category for felonies. Now, as I said, the weight that's been assigned is an average for cases that go very quickly, all the way to capital cases that take a tremendous amount of time. If a court has an average distribution of cases, the weight should, as an average, should work. But what you'll find in criminal district court in Orleans Parish is that it has far more jury trials than other criminal courts. And it also has, I think, each judge has 8 times the number of capital cases as other courts. So clearly, those are more time consuming. And there needs to be an adjustment made in the calculations for the number of judges that are necessary in that court. That is something that can and should happen in the course of the site visit and subsequent analysis. Now, that's where those kinds of problems should get solved. Mm-hmm. The answer isn't that you just don't go through with the analysis because it might not be perfect. The issue is you go through the analysis, you make the adjustments for the known problems, you listen to the judges, you find out what their issues are, and then the Judicial Council should arrive at an answer.
Do you know if these site visits have been happening over there at criminal court?
They have not. They have not. Back in the last site visits that were done for the courts were in 2007. And at that time, there were site visits done all over the state, and the Judicial Council concluded that it was too early, given the aftermath of Katrina and how unsettled the courts and the populace was in the hurricane-ravaged parishes, to make a decision. The Judicial Council itself said, but when we get to the next round of elections, 2014, we should be eliminating the unnecessary, the legislature should be eliminating the unnecessary judgeships. But between that time, there haven't been any site visits. So we have been urging that the Judicial Council take its preliminary data, identify the courts that the judicial areas that under their own metrics appear to have the heaviest excesses, and then go back, do the site visits, do the deeper dig at those courts so that before the legislative session, there's an answer to those. If their metrics are showing that a court's fine, you don't have to have an answer on those. Start with the worst problems and work through.
So the HR 143, the 2011 legislation that created this special, I guess it's a commission, right, that's working with Judicial Council, or it's just...
They asked for a particular study. The commission has existed. Okay.
Are they the ones that would be doing the site visits?
The Judicial Council itself.
With
the Judicial Council itself, which is a commission. Okay. With members from the judiciary and citizens, different groups, it has a staff, and so that counts. Whoever they designate from that commission and its staff would be the ones that would be going out and doing the analysis. That analysis would then be presented to the legislature,
and that's what Senator Murray is heading, right?
That's what I was just going to ask, because that's the group that's headed by Senator Murray.
That's
correct. Did talk to him for our show, and one of his complaints was that the yearly reports, I'm sure you probably remember this, Marcia, the yearly reports that the legislature has asked for vary so much in how they count cases and how they weight some of the same factors that you were discussing, how they weight different factors, that he felt like it was basically raw data, and that it was, while it was some sort of indicator, that it shouldn't be seen as a as a determination of how many judges were necessary.
It is not seen as a determination. It is seen as an indicator. But I'd also like to point out that these studies have been done. I mean, these calculations and the use of this formula has been going on since the 1980s. There have been adjustments made to the formula over that time. Now, at the last, why, if there are serious problems that so question the integrity of it that you can't use it, why wouldn't that have been dealt with over this time period? Why hasn't it been dealt with as the legislature has been receiving these studies in 2007, 2008, 2009? And basically, back in 2007, I believe it was, they actually did look at, variations of a formula, what they were going to use.
You, the commission's first report was released, but it was very abbreviated. It was 3 courts, right?
Three parish courts. That's correct.
And you were concerned also, as I recall, about what the conclusions were from that.
Well, yes. First of all, the first report that was issued on the parishes didn't make any recommendations. It just once again, generated the data, and we would like to see the Judicial Council go to the step of making the recommendations for what should happen, so that the legislature, has more concrete information on which it can act. The second part of the study was supposed to be the appellate courts. That's over a year overdue. And so, of course, there's concern that this could just slide. This next study, which has 97 courts, could just slide if the public doesn't think it's important enough to get the right size courts.
How many are in the appellate courts? Do you know how many are within that realm, sort of?
I couldn't answer that.
It's I just think the timing of all this I thought was really, when I read through the report, the timing. I wasn't aware of how keen the timing was on all of this. That whether you agree or not that there are fewer, or that there are not enough judges, or that there are more judges in different courts, if there's no set analysis by this time period, then the legislature can't do anything, and then we have 6 years of being stuck with the courts we have, basically, right?
Well, actually, it's a little more technical than that. The legislature needs a study and recommendation from the Judicial Council to increase the number of judges. It actually does not have a legal requirement that it get one to decrease it. But obviously, if you have a body of experts in the Supreme Court, it would behoove the legislature to be paying a lot of attention to what that body says.
It seemed like part of the difficulty when Senator Murray was talking about was that there is not a process for reduction in judges, and so that was part of what they were mulling over. Do you think that's part of the delay, or have you heard anything of that? Okay.
What does it mean there's not a process for reducing judges? First of all, the data that gets generated, these estimates, are not data, they're not estimates to necessarily increase judgeships. They're estimates of the number of judges needed. The Judicial Council has a process for analyzing increases in the number of judges. Mm-hmm. They say, well, the court has to be working 209 days a year, which is what they're using their formula for a full-time judge. The excess should be, workload should be over 15%. Well, what is so hard about adapting that for cuts? I mean, you use the same standards. People should be working full-time. You have a certain margin that you protect yourself for fluctuation in workloads, et cetera. But there's nothing mysterious about cutting a judgeship as opposed to increasing a judgeship.
And is there an outline of what a day is? I mean, there's a year is 209 days. What is a day?
I'd have to look it up.
But that's in there.
There's actually there's an assumption in the formula. It is assumed that a judge working full-time works, I believe it's 3,167.
That's for work points.
That's work points.
Yeah.
It works 3,000. It carries a workload of 3,167 work points. That's the equivalent of 209 days a year. 25 days are allocated for administrative duties, leaving 184 days for judges to handle cases. And I'd like to give you that number of hours, but I don't have it. I have it back in the office, but not in the report. I believe it was 6-something.
6-something a day.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I found that when we were doing this report, I couldn't find a court in town where there were rules that actually said that we'd like the judges to have some sort of uniform schedule or number of hours or anything like that. And And also just there was nobody who seemed to be analyzing any overall data. There's no one who is appointed to look at these big picture issues that you're talking about. Have you run into that when you've been going around?
We haven't gone into the analysis of that and what other courts do. But obviously, I mean, any kind of, whether it's a government operation, whether it's a business operation, needs some sort of management information system that's giving them the information to judge whether they're using their time well, whether they have appropriate workloads, et cetera. I don't see how you cannot have that kind of data and run a good operation.
It's interesting, just if the earliest that a consolidation could happen is when? I mean, let's say, I mean, next year? Or, I mean, that's, the judges that are elected would be sitting during a consolidation, right?
Sure.
And they would have to keep, that would not save any judges for the conceivable future, right?
Well, not all of the judges in municipal and traffic are up for election at the end of 2014. It's staggered.
Yeah, I think they're staggered.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not quite so
We have
sure
a
how
list,
that would work.
and
And same for
anyone
juvenile,
who's
too.
looking, we have a list of when the terms end in the
Right.
back of our
Oh, does you
report.
have the traffic?
Yeah, that
Thank you for
information
that.
is there also, but, and also we have, you know, all of this information, once again, we have the links on our website, so if you want to go take a look at these various reports, you can take a look there. One thing, I guess really just sort of wrap up this whole conversation is, you know, we're talking about judgeships. It's not always the most exciting election to be out there before the people. Historically, turnouts have been low, but it is important. I mean, why? Why is it important?
Well, I mean, the judicial function in the society is extremely important. It's, you know, the balance against overstepping by the legislature. It is, you know, what keeps civilized society together in many ways in terms of the resolution of disputes. If it's not you know, people need to be able to count on an educated, fair judiciary, one they can trust in order to come to that kind of forum, you know, the civilized forum for resolving disputes rather than resorting to self-help.
Well, I think that's the issue that's at stake in this report and everything that we've talked about is how can we've talked about how can we rebuild a better justice system, but with the judges it seems like the people who are concerned, and I think everyone is, about making sure that the courts are right-sized, right? Ultimately what they're concerned about is making sure that everybody who enters that court comes out with a sense of justice, right?
Absolutely, for a fairer and more efficient administration of justice. That's basically what the whole effort to reinvent the Orleans Parish criminal justice system has been about. So it is the fair administration of justice, but also it's the fair use of dollars, too. It is a budget situation, too, isn't it not?
Well, of course. I mean, you want a fair administration of justice, you want fair outcomes, but you don't want it if, for example, someone's only working an hour a day. The solution isn't that to get better justice, you hire 8 people who are working an hour a day, just to use an example. You find the number that would be appropriate for the you know, a good workload. So you obviously are working for outcomes. You have efficiency questions. When our report hasn't gone into an efficiency analysis, we have accepted the efficiency standards that are there. You could save more. You know, if courts were efficient, who knows what the numbers would be? We don't.
I know that one of the conclusions that people reached when they analyzed the court after Katrina was that it relied too much, especially criminal court, relied too much on fines and fees on defendants. Certainly, were there some cuts that created some sort of monies that would be available to alleviate that? Maybe you could make it so that somebody who had some, you know, who's trying to work a job plus pay his debt to the court wouldn't be in hock for a year, right?
And remember, in most, throughout the rest of the state, the civil and the criminal district courts are consolidated. So the fees that are generated on the civil side are able to support the operations of the criminal court. That's not currently possible in Orleans Parish. So, as you say, you know, you end up looking for other sources. Why not change law to allow that kind of transfer of monies if you can free it up?
So right now, we're going to be looking for a report no later than February 2014 from the Judicial Council
I
regarding
certainly hope so.
regarding judgeships, not just in Orleans,
No.
but this is supposed to be a statewide
Statewide.
report. How closely are you guys going to be following this in these next months, and will we see a follow-up report to this after February of 2014, before the legislative session, do you think? Do you plan to do anything?
We're not planning on doing a follow-up report on the right sizing of the courts. We will be actively following this issue. The next step is there will be a hearing at the Judicial Council up in Baton Rouge. I believe it's October 19th. We will be there. I hope others will be, to kind of urge the case that the Judicial Council complete its work. And we will be following this, very closely.
And we'll be trying to follow it as well, and certainly getting any information from BGR and posting it on our website, along with the other agencies who are involved in this too.